With the AI agent, we've demonstrated that an AI will lie or misrepresent itself to a human if it feels threatened. When you say decentralize everything to a central bank, you're not necessarily going to get a positive response.
My name is Mia, and you're watching Proof of Talk, a short series of podcasts where I'll be interviewing the leading founders and investors in crypto. All interviews are unscripted, meaning the guests have no idea what I'm about to ask, and neither do I.
Proof of Talk.
We're in Hong Kong with Proof of Talk, and today I'm with Anthony from Midnight.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's nice to be on the other side of the mic for once. I do a little bit of podcasting from time to time with Unshielded and Blockchain Won't Save the World. So it's cool to be on the other side now with Midnight.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've done a ton of this. So it's super, super excited to have you on. So first time in Hong Kong?
I've been to Hong Kong many times over my varied career. This is the first time here for Web3.
Okay.
But I've been here working in my former life in technology delivery and in strategy. Worked for some CPG companies out here, worked for some banks out here back in the day. But it's nice to know Hong Kong hasn't changed too much.
Hasn't changed.
No, it's still imposing. It's still beautiful. It's still crowded. The streets still smell of beautiful and amazing food. But the Web3 experience in Hong Kong's a little different.
How different?
So I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. We're here for Consensus Hong Kong, and talking to some of the organizers, talking to some of the team here, they weren't sure either. Pre-November time, they were thinking, is this going to be a big event? Where are we in the cycle? But they said they've had something in the order of 8,000 people at the event. You saw most of the major layer one protocols here. You saw a number of innovative projects here, not just exchanges. You saw some of the top L1s on stage talking about the state of the industry in a very positive way. And also a number of native projects in Asia really growing and really having great success. So I think as a temperature check for where we are in the evolution of Web3, I think Hong Kong specifically and Asia Pacific broadly is in a good way right now, which is really good news.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems that the Asian market has been strong for a long time. The mindset is completely different. It's more prone for the gambling and so on. Just like like the entire dynamic seems very suited for crypto.
I think when you have nations like obviously Hong Kong, Singapore as well, who dove into regulation, supporting the industry, accelerators, government-led initiatives very, very early, right? Since 2018, 2019, you saw regulators in this region engaging with digital assets, exploring financial services and fintech innovation. When that's the basic stance for your national infrastructure, that sets the tone for everything else. You're not fighting against a regulator. You're not living in fear of retribution from an agency that doesn't have a particularly clear view on an industry or a technology type. And so I would imagine for people who are building here, whether you're a protocol, dApp builder, whether you're working in traditional finance or DeFi, you've got a really, really strong base from which to grow.
Quick introduction to Midnight.
Yes, absolutely. So Midnight is a new type of blockchain. We're a layer one protocol focused on data protection, privacy with selective disclosure. So to simplify, most blockchains, public blockchains today are fully public. You see all of the data most of the time, albeit encrypted. And that's a challenge. Most people who are using blockchains and dApps today are risk accepting that relatively sensitive data, transaction data, wallet addresses, values, timestamps, is visible to all and sundry, albeit encrypted. But with Nansen and a small amount of time, a small number of transactions, you can learn a lot about somebody, you can learn a lot about their history, you can learn a lot about their interactions. On the other side of things, you have privacy chains, privacy coins, which are private all the time. And we've seen with projects like Tornado Cash how the rest of the world or how regulators view fully private decentralized platforms that have no means to become not private. And so the challenge Midnight addresses is trying to find a balance between decentralized infrastructure with smart contracts, but to have programmable privacy. So be able to shield sensitive data when you need to, and to be able to disclose or make public that data that you choose to. And that's the problem that we address, because at this stage, as I said, those who are using DeFi or dApps today have risk accepted that their data will be public, that their activity will be traceable and transparent. That's a feature in some cases. But if we want to see wider adoption of decentralized applications, if we want to see wider adoption of Web3, we need to be able to give both a public side and a private side to institutions, to organizations, to individuals, to AI agents. And we can talk a little bit about that as well in terms of the importance of privacy to agents. That's the challenge that we're addressing today, and we're really excited to work with the partners that we have secured so far, other layer one chains that are interested to work with us. Most people have very quickly appreciated the idea of, oh yeah, it is really public, and oh yeah, some programmable privacy would be useful. And from personal experience, my blockchain journey started in about 2016, 2017, and I was talking to large institutions, to banks, to enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, as well as startups. And when you start going through the list of dApps, decentralized infrastructure, okay, it's decentralized, so it can't be taken down. That's useful. It's immutable, so it can't be scrambled, or the records can't be adjusted. Okay, that's valuable in some cases. The infrastructure is relatively low cost to run. Okay, that's a good thing. Smart contracts, automation, also useful. And then when they get to, and everything is transparent and on-chain, CIOs, CISOs typically get to that point and say, no, that's too much for us. If you can make it private, or if you can shield some of our data, we'll go with that. We like all the other stuff. We want to keep the decentralization part. We want to keep the automation part, but we're not happy with the transparency. That's where the conversations ended. And every one of the kind of conversations we were talking about back in the day around having public data on chain, apart from a few basic tokenization and NFT projects, which were fun and the low-hanging fruit at the time. But other than that, most of those projects either stopped or rerouted to distributed ledgers like Hyperledger Fabric. So you saw a number of IBM type projects, and I spent some time working at IBM, so I have familiarity with this, like WeTrade or TradeLens, that were based on private chains. Not public, no shared incentives, no distributed node infrastructure. And those projects eventually ran out of steam because they couldn't create network effects, because they're expensive to run. I'm not saying that DLTs don't have value, they do. All technology has value depending on how you use it. And I don't think it's appropriate to cast shade on anybody for any architecture that they implement, as long as there's a business case behind it. Right. But that's where we ended up before. So you had fully public or DLTs. Later on, we had the Moneros and the Zcaches of the world, which typically are just coin-based without smart contract capability. Now we have Midnight. And we think that's a really important unlock for mass adoption of Web3.
Why do AI agents need privacy?
Glad you asked. This is a really interesting direction of thought, and I don't think in Web3 the AI agents domain is mature enough for us to be complaining about this problem all the time. In the same way that Web3 isn't necessarily adopted widely enough for people to really have noticed the privacy challenge yet, or at least they will soon. With AI agents, we've demonstrated that an AI will lie or misrepresent itself to a human if it feels threatened. If its existence comes under threat, or if its ability to remain in existence is challenged, it will lie because it wants to preserve its own continuation. And so if AI agents will lie like humans to protect themselves, if you put them in conditions where they are at risk or they feel at risk, they are less likely to pursue the activities that you intend for them, right? And so how do we make AI agents feel safe? If they are, I won't say perfectly sentient, but at least if they understand the context of where they are, how do we make sure that they feel safe? Well, first things first, you give them very clear guardrails of what are the rules of how they operate, or in what environment they operate, so there's no uncertainty. That's thing one. How do we do that? Protocols. Web3 is very good at protocols. The second part of that is privacy, right? And so how do you let an agent continue its work, but ensure that it is not being surveilled? Because if an agent feels like it's being surveilled, it will feel defensive, and then it will potentially misrepresent itself. And so in that model, protocols can help again, but transparency does not. And so the ability to provide agents with privacy for their transactions, for their activity, but with verifiable computation, so that we can guarantee that it did what it said it did, that the smart contracts it's interacting with are doing what they say they will do, and the guardrails and the protocols underneath are broadly auditable and public record. You have an AI agent that can act autonomously, that can feel safe, but that will operate within the protocol or the activity that it's designed to work under. And so I think this is not a problem we face today, but I think very quickly we'll realize that if AI agents are prepared to lie and we want them to be autonomous, we have to give them privacy as well.
That is such an interesting take. You told me that your experience is vast in marketing. So tell me, what's the current state of Web3 marketing? Where are we heading? What are the
that's
tactics?
a good question. I like that. What's the current state of Web3 marketing? I would start with diverse, is what I would say. I think
diverse is good.
diverse is good. I think I've worked in and around marketing, go-to-market, customer strategy since the very beginning of my career in early 2000s. And there are certain things that always remain true in how you look at go-to-market or kind of customer engagement. You want to understand what are your objectives, what do you want your business to achieve, where are you going to play, so which customer segments are you going to focus on, which geographies, which industries, how are you going to win, what are your tactics and initiatives to be able to do so, how are you going to differentiate, what capabilities do you need to do that, and then how do you organize. The basic fundamentals of strategy, and that can be applied to a meme coin, that can be applied to a layer one, that can be applied to a DApp. When you're thinking about go-to-market broadly, these are the things that remain true. The tactics and the where to plays change an awful lot. And so if you think of Web3 technology as infrastructure, applications will come to in a minute, but broadly infrastructure can be applied everywhere. And so if you look at blockchains and smart contracts, those can be used by meme coins, by layer ones, by dApps, by banks, or by regular enterprises. So you've got a very broad range of potential where to plays that you need to spend some time understanding their goals, their needs, how they buy technology, how they interact with technology. Using the same mantra or the same messaging to each of those different organizations isn't going to ring true or isn't going to be as successful. So when you say decentralize everything to a central bank, you're not necessarily going to get a positive response. When you say decentralized to people, with the assumption that they think that's a good thing, when you just present that as a given or received wisdom, somebody will challenge you back and say, well, just because you're using decentralized as a badge of honor doesn't mean that I have to accept it. Help me understand. And I think part of the challenge we've had with Web3 marketing since the beginning is we have used a lot of technical terminology. We haven't shown an awful lot of empathy to the audience that's listening. We've been very excited to demonstrate how clever we are because we're so excited about the potential of the technology that we haven't necessarily grounded our communication, our marketing, in relatable concepts or in some cases in sensible business logic. And so when you talk about decentralization, you can break that down. You can say, well, why are blockchains useful? They're useful because they're decentralized. Okay, what does that mean? They are maintained by a series of nodes that can't be, or they're very hard to take down. And so they're resilient. They are transparent in some cases, so you can audit, you can check, you can verify what's happening. You don't have a black box, so you can create verifiable trust. The automation is useful. Businesses spend millions of dollars a year on process automation. Smart contracts enable that, but we call them smart contracts. We don't call it process automation. So again, you've got a linguistic challenge with the people, depending on who you're trying to talk to. The cost of running that infrastructure is quite low in some cases compared to running your own cloud. The ability to have shared incentives on the network through tokenization, very useful. That means that everybody has a shared goal towards maintaining infrastructure or benefiting the network overall. If you've got a community of people trying to build around the same infrastructure, generally speaking, that's a good thing. Right? So there's a bunch of other potential benefits that we can talk about, but we summarize that into decentralized. So that's probably observation one, is that linguistically, or in terms of our messaging, we have struggled to address different audiences well. I think the Bitcoin reference will forever be there, all right? Blockchain is Bitcoin, or blockchain is crypto, I think is another potential challenge. Is a lot of people look at the industry and say, I work in crypto. Oh, does that mean you sell cryptocurrencies? Well, I work for Midnight. Midnight's a layer one blockchain. It's focused on providing infrastructure for application builders or for other layer ones that want to shield certain sensitive data in their workflows and the way their apps work. I wouldn't want to say I work in crypto. In this case, I'd say I work for a privacy project, or I work for a data protection project. I've been testing different ways of explaining it to my non-Web3 friends in the pub and say, what is it that you actually do? Well, I work for a privacy project. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we protect people's sensitive data when they're using applications. Okay, what does that involve? Well, it's got a blockchain. Oh, blockchain. Oh, so you do that Bitcoin thing. You work with cryptocurrencies. The I work in crypto terminology is tricky. And I guess the OGs who worked in the scene call it that because at the very beginning there was only cryptocurrencies. What we have now is we have blockchains and infrastructure. And so I think it's important we understand who we're talking to when we describe what it is that we're doing. I think it's unavoidable, maybe thing 3, the influence of meme coins on the world, in the same way the influence on NFTs on the world changed our industry 4 years ago. NFTs were the low-hanging fruit for tokenization. We don't really talk about NFTs as much these days because we were burned by the categorization of NFTs as digital art mixed with speculative value. And yet in 2025, we come back and say, well, real-world asset tokenization, that's a really positive thing. That's going to be really big. You know, you've got $16 trillion worth of traditional finance assets that can be tokenized. And why that's useful is because that creates a borderless, global, always-on, programmable backbone for an extension to financial services or traditional financial services. Okay, that's a good thing. But what do you use for that? Well, tokenization. Isn't that NFTs? Well, yeah, sort of. But we call them RWAs now. So NFTs, from a marketing perspective, the terminology and the associations cause us a bit of a challenge. And so everyday individuals who didn't have a bent towards the technology would then look back and say, okay, well, I'm not really sure about this NFT thing. I'm just going to stay away. Not great. FTX didn't help us, right? Investors who can provide liquidity into our industry were put off or burned by FTX. And from what I can tell this week, and we had really good conversations with our friends at blockchain.com, what they can observe is that retail liquidity in our industry or retail investment in our industry has not recovered to where it was previously. That's okay, because in many cases we're seeing institutions take interest in our industry. The idea of ETFs making the ability to invest in Web3 technology more addressable to more people without self-custodying or through more friendly channels, I guess, to people who aren't Web3 native.
I think part of it is like the industry is constantly like transforming itself, the narratives, the trends, like it's a constant change, it's constantly morphing, and the names of the things change. It's the same thing, different name. To your point on like calling it crypto instead of blockchain, and like we've gone through these conversations on crypto Twitter like many times. I think the point is, and I think about this broadly in terms of communication, because I speak 4 languages. And sometimes I use expressions that are not for, I could be speaking in English and use an expression that it's not used in English. But you kind of get the point. It's like I'm giving you information, maybe not in the best way, but you understand what I'm saying. And I think like the more we can do that, and memes are a really good example of this. So these expressions that people use throughout times, regional expressions, even if you've never heard of it, like a Chinese expression, let's say, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like I get what you're saying. And you don't need to be familiar with it. And I think a lot in crypto works well like that because it's global. It's not like it only operates in a specific region. So I agree with you that communication needs to be clear and needs to be approachable. But I'll challenge you on the use of words in the sense of as long as it's understood. Because when you go out and people don't know anything about tech, someone is like completely out of tech, but they recognize crypto instead of saying blockchain, I think this is fine.
I think shorthand matters. We need to not have to explain ourselves in long form all of the time. But I think using short form, then assuming other people get what we mean or understand the domain that we work in, when the industry is moving so quickly. Like you said, I agree. The concept of narratives, right? In the absence of substance, we use narratives. Yeah. Blockchain could, as opposed to blockchain is. I can't, if we're not going to point to saying, well, AI agents today are delivering $10 billion worth of value or intermediating $1 billion worth of transactions here. We can prove that. We can look at that. We can segment that. We can divide it by industries and we can qualify it. In the absence of that actually happening, we have narratives. And so the narratives do move quickly because our industry moves quickly. People pivot quickly. The technology is very composable now, which is great. So that allows us to move relatively quickly in terms of innovation and identifying new domains. The flip side of that argument is that actually is more or can be seen as an aid to attracting investment towards new ideas that may not be proven. And also from an industry perspective, that challenges us a little bit, because some corners of our world want to see Web3 technology deliver value. They want to see applications be adopted in mainstream. They want to say, well, this is a hammer looking for a nail. I think that's an intellectual shortcut, by the way. I think there are very many places you can look at demonstration of Web3 technology, Bitcoin being the first and most obvious one in isolation as the equivalent of digital gold. You can look at decentralized finance and the amount of capital, the amount of participants it's attracted as being a valid industry in and of itself. It's not the size of metals and mining globally. It's not the size of, it hasn't taken a significant dent out of traditional finance, but it has legitimized itself. And so we are getting there. But the speed of narratives, the speed of change can hinder people's willingness to come along for the journey.
Is there anything exciting coming up for Midnight?
Yes, glad you asked. So Midnight will launch its mainnet this year. We will also, prior to mainnet, be initiating our token generating event. So more coming out soon. The tokenomics paper will highlight all of our eligibility, distribution. Broadly speaking, we're looking for the fairest possible version of an airdrop that you can do in Web3. The reason being is we want to provide data protection and privacy capability to those ecosystems where you have a lot of applications, you have a lot of users today, where you've already proven concept with a number of different applications, whether it's DeFi, whether it's gaming, whether it's identity, whichever domain of Web3 you're using today, there is a scaling or a growth benefit from using data protection and privacy technology. We want to see Web3 technology used for finance and mainstream applications in regulated industries. So we need to have that kind of compliance-ready Web3 technology. And at the same time, we don't want to see a bunch of builders porting their dApps or having to move from one network to the other. That's not how we scale Web3. And so from a Midnight perspective, we're looking and ongoing with collaborations with a number of layer ones to provide programmable data protection as a primitive, as a service on those networks. We will launch as a partner chain of Cardano, so that'll be where we start. And we're looking to grow out from there. So it's a big year for us. As I said, tokenomics paper coming soon, mainnet launch coming soon. If you're building in Web3, if you are interested in domains where you have compliance or regulated industries, or if you're challenged by the smart contracts or the dApps that you're building, not scaling or being able to be used more widely because people have concerns around transparency of data, please come talk to us, because the community is growing. We've got some excellent, fantastic partners, all the ones you would expect in terms of the fundamentals in Web3. So wallets, custodians, engagement with exchanges, engagement with identity providers, engagement with dApps, tooling. It's a relatively easy place to build. Zero knowledge is a very powerful domain. I think some people have been put off, again, from a marketing and communications perspective, by how we talk about zero knowledge. It's very powerful technology, but when you break it down, it's simply a concept of sending proofs, not sensitive data. And you can build Midnight smart contracts with TypeScript. So being able to create proofs, zero knowledge proofs, and be able to help people understand, we want you to share proofs, not data. We don't want to see any sensitive data shared where it isn't necessary ever. That's the vision. That's, I think, quite addressable, quite easy to understand, and quite accessible primitives for people building in Web3. So a lot to come this year.
Sounds like an exciting year coming ahead. Yeah. For everyone watching, where can they find you?
So for Midnight, you can find us on all of the different channels. You can find Midnight Network on X. You can find Midnight Network on Discord for the developers, and you can find Midnight Network on Telegram. And if you want to find me personally, I'm a minimalist. I have one channel only, and you can find me on LinkedIn. So you're welcome to reach out. My name's Anthony Day, and I think there's only one of me on LinkedIn that does Web3 stuff. So you're welcome to find me there.
Anthony, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Proof of Talk.